The morning sun had barely risen over San Francisco when Marcus Chen pulled his worn bicycle from the small storage closet of his studio apartment. At 23, he wasn't where he had imagined he would be after finishing his computer science degree. But life had other plans, and here he was, preparing for another day of cycling through the city's steep hills as a courier. Marcus checked his phone. 6:45 a.m. Perfect timing. He needed to reach the courier company's office by 7:30 for the morning briefing. As he locked his apartment door, Mrs. Rodriguez from next door was already heading out for her early shift at the hospital cafeteria. "Good morning, Marcus. I made extra tamales yesterday. Come get some when you're back," she called out, her kind face wrinkled with a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. You're too kind," Marcus replied, touched by his neighbor's thoughtfulness. In this rough part of town, such small acts of kindness made life bearable. His studio apartment was tiny, just 300 square feet, but it was all he could afford on his courier salary. Half of his earnings went to his mother's medical bills back home. Cancer treatment wasn't cheap, and since his father's death 3 years ago, Marcus had become the family's main support. The morning air was crisp as he pedaled through the quiet streets. His old bike creaked slightly, but Marcus knew every sound, every loose bolt. This bike was his lifeline, his means of survival. He had bought it secondhand when he first started this job, after spending 3 months applying to every tech company in the Bay Area with no success. At the courier office, Marcus's supervisor, Tom. The afternoon rain had started when Marcus arrived at the financial district. The tall glass buildings reflected the gray sky, and business people hurried along the sidewalks with umbrellas. His last delivery was to an office on Montgomery Street, just a few blocks away. As Marcus locked his bike to a street sign, he noticed his shoes were completely wet. The delivery bag, thankfully, was waterproof, keeping the packages safe. He checked his phone again. 4:45 p.m. This would be his final delivery for the day, and he was looking forward to Mrs. Rodriguez's tamales. The package was small but marked urgent. Marcus knew the area well. There was a short alley between buildings that would save him 5 minutes of walking. He had used this route many times before. As he turned into the alley, the sound of the busy street faded away. That's when he heard it, a woman's frightened voice. "Please, take my purse. Just don't hurt me." Marcus stopped. About 20 feet ahead, a man in a black hoodie was pointing something at a young woman in a business suit. Even from behind, Marcus could see the woman was shaking. The robber hadn't noticed him yet. Marcus's heart began to race. He could turn around and call the police. That would be the safe choice. But he knew that by the time they arrived, it would be too late. The woman's fear was real. He could hear it in her trembling voice. Without thinking too much, Marcus reached into his delivery bag. He pulled out his heavy bike lock and an old metal thermos. The robber was completely focused on the woman and her purse. "Hurry up," the robber growled, pushing what Marcus now could clearly see was a gun closer to the woman. Marcus took a deep breath. Then he threw his thermos hard against the opposite wall of the alley. The crash echoed loudly in the narrow space. The robber spun around, startled by the sudden noise. In that split second, the woman, who Marcus would later learn was Sarah Reynolds, acted on instinct. She swung her heavy laptop bag at the robber's hand, knocking the gun away. Marcus didn't waste a second. He ran forward, swinging his bike lock on its chain like a weapon. The robber, who hadn't expected to deal with two people, took a step back. His gun had skidded several feet away in a puddle. "Get out of here," Marcus shouted to Sarah, positioning himself between her and the robber. He could hear her heels clicking rapidly as she ran toward the street. The robber looked at Marcus, then at his gun lying in the puddle. Marcus held his bike lock ready, his heart pounding but his grip steady. For a moment, nobody moved. Then they heard voices at the entrance of the alley, people responding to the noise. The robber turned and ran toward the other end of the alley. As he fled, Marcus quickly pulled out his phone and managed to take several photos of the man's face as he looked back. It was over in less than a minute. Marcus's hands were shaking now as he picked up his thermos, which had survived the throw. He heard rapid footsteps approaching and turned to see Sarah returning with 2 security guards from her building. "Are you okay?" she asked, her face full of concern. "You're bleeding." Marcus touched his forehead in surprise. In the chaos, he hadn't noticed that he'd gotten cut, probably from debris when he threw the thermos. It wasn't deep, but blood was trickling down his face. The security guards called the police while Sarah insisted on checking Marcus's cut. She pulled a clean handkerchief from her purse and pressed it gently against his forehead. "I'm Sarah Reynolds," she said, her hands still shaking slightly. "You just saved me from being robbed. Maybe worse." Her voice cracked a little at the last words. "I'm Marcus Chen," he replied, suddenly feeling exhausted as the adrenaline wore off. "I'm just a courier. I was making a delivery, and—" "Just a courier?" Sarah interrupted, looking at him with intense gratitude. "You're the bravest person I've ever met. You risked your life to help a complete stranger." As police sirens wailed in the distance, Marcus realized he still had an undelivered package in his bag. Somehow, in all the chaos, he had managed to keep it safe and dry. Sarah noticed him checking the package. "Don't worry about that now," she said firmly. "You need to get this cut looked at. I'm taking you to urgent care, and I won't take no for an answer. It's the least I can do." Looking at her determined face, Marcus realized this ordinary delivery had turned into something that would change both their lives forever. The urgent care clinic was quiet when Sarah and Marcus arrived. His cut had stopped bleeding, but the nurse insisted he needed 2 small stitches. As they sat in the waiting room, Marcus called his supervisor to explain why his last delivery was late. "Don't worry about it, Chen," Tom said after hearing the story. "You did good. Take care of yourself. I'll handle the client." Sarah sat next to Marcus, still in her expensive business suit, though her usual confident posture was replaced by concern. She had already given her statement to the police, and Marcus's photos of the robber were now in their database. "You really don't have to stay," Marcus said, feeling uncomfortable with all the attention. "I'm sure you have important things to do." Sarah shook her head. "Important things? You just saved me from an armed robber. Everything else can wait." She paused, studying him. "Why did you do it? You could have just walked away." Marcus thought about it. "I guess I couldn't walk away knowing someone needed help. My father always said that doing nothing when you can help is the same as doing something wrong." "Your father sounds wise," Sarah smiled. "What does he do?" "He passed away 3 years ago," Marcus replied quietly. "Heart attack. It was very sudden." Sarah's face softened. "I'm so sorry." After a moment, she added, "I lost my mom to cancer when I was in college. It changes you, doesn't it?" For the first time, Marcus saw past Sarah's polished exterior to someone who understood loss. The conversation became easier after that. While the doctor cleaned his cut, Sarah asked about his life. Marcus found himself telling her about his computer science degree, his mother's illness, and his struggle to find work in tech. "Wait," Sarah sat up straighter. "You have a CS degree. Why are you working as a courier?" Marcus smiled without humor. "Bay Area Community College isn't exactly Stanford. Plus, most companies want years of experience for entry-level jobs. After 3 months of rejections, I needed to pay bills. The courier job was supposed to be temporary, but temporary things have a way of becoming permanent." Sarah finished his thought. She worked with her phone for a moment, then looked up. "What's your email?" "Why?" "Because our department is desperately understaffed, and we're having cybersecurity issues that our experienced consultants can't solve." She made air quotes around the word experienced. "I want to forward your resume to our HR director." Marcus felt his face grow hot. "I don't want charity, and my resume, it's been a while since I updated it." Sarah looked him directly in the eyes. "This isn't charity, Marcus. You know what I do at Reynolds and Blake Investment Firm. I assess risk and potential. Right now, I see someone with a technical degree who thinks quickly under pressure, shows incredible judgment, and clearly has strong ethical principles. That's exactly what we need." The doctor finished with the stitches, and Marcus touched the small bandage carefully. "I don't know." "Just send me your resume," Sarah insisted. "Update it first if you want. What do you have to lose?" Outside the clinic, the rain had stopped, and the early evening sun was breaking through the clouds. Marcus's bike was still locked where he had left it, and surprisingly, his last package was still intact in his bag. "I can still deliver this," he said, checking the address. Sarah looked at her watch. "It's almost 7 p.m. Everything's closed." She took out her business card and wrote something on the back. "Here's my personal email. Send me your resume tonight if you can. And Marcus, She paused, her professional confidence wavering for a moment. Thank you again. Not everyone would have done what you did. As Sarah walked toward the waiting Uber, Marcus looked at her card. On the back, she had written, "You have more potential than you realize. Don't let fear of rejection stop you from trying." That night, in his small studio apartment, Marcus sat at his desk. Mrs. Rodriguez's tamales were delicious as always, and they gave him energy to work. His old laptop hummed as he opened his resume file for the first time in months. Looking at the blank document, Marcus thought about Sarah's words. Maybe it was time to try again. After all, he had faced an armed robber today. Updating a resume couldn't be scarier than that. As he began to type, Marcus didn't know that this simple act of updating his resume would be the first step toward changing his entire life. 1 week after the incident, Marcus was staring at his phone in disbelief. The email from Reynolds and Blake Investment Firm's HR department invited him for an interview. He had spent 3 nights perfecting his resume before sending it to Sarah, but he never expected such a quick response. His hands shook slightly as he replied, accepting the interview time. Then he looked at his closet. He would need a proper suit. The only formal clothes he owned was the black suit from his father's funeral, and it was now too small. That evening, after his courier shift, Marcus visited a second-hand store recommended by Mrs. Rodriguez. He found a navy blue suit that fit well enough after minor adjustments. It cost him half of his week's earnings, but as he looked in the mirror, he saw a different person staring back. "You look like a proper businessman," Mrs. Rodriguez said, helping him adjust the tie. She had been a seamstress in her younger days and offered to alter the suit slightly. "Just remember, clothes don't make the man, your brain and your heart. That's what matters." The morning of the interview, Marcus woke up 2 hours early. He had already informed Tom that he needed the morning off, promising to work extra hours to make up for it. As he put on his suit, his mother called. "I got your message," she said in Chinese. "An interview at a big company. Your father would be so proud." "It's probably nothing, Mom," Marcus replied, trying to manage both their expectations. "They probably interview hundreds of people." "Stop doubting yourself," his mother said firmly. "You are your father's son. He never let anything stop him, and neither should you." Marcus arrived at the Reynolds and Blake building 30 minutes early. The security guard looked at his visitor pass with surprise, probably remembering him as the courier who usually delivered packages. The elevator rode smoothly to the 35th floor, where the IT department was located. The HR director, Mrs. Thompson, was a friendly woman in her 50s. "Sarah Reynolds personally recommended you," she said, looking through his resume. "That's quite unusual for her. She said you helped her with a situation last week." Marcus nodded, unsure how much Sarah had told them about the incident. "I just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Mrs. Thompson smiled. "Now, tell me about your experience with cybersecurity." For the next hour, Marcus surprised himself. All those nights studying computer science, the extra projects he did in college, the coding problems he solved in his free time, everything came flooding back. When the technical director, Mr. Jenkins, joined them and started asking specific questions about network security, Marcus's answers were clear and confident. "Your community college had a strong program," Mr. Jenkins noted, looking impressed. "And I see you did an independent project on physical security vulnerabilities in networks." Marcus nodded eagerly. "Yes, I noticed how delivery personnel often have access to secure areas without proper verification. It's a major security gap that most companies overlook." The interview extended into a second hour. They gave him a practical test, asking him to identify vulnerabilities in a sample system. Marcus spotted 3 critical issues that even their current team had missed. As the interview was ending, Sarah stopped by the conference room. She was wearing a different expensive suit today, but her smile was warm and genuine. "I heard you were here. How did it go?" Before Marcus could answer, Mr. Jenkins spoke up. "Ms. Reynolds, your instincts were right. We need someone who thinks differently about security, especially after last month's breach attempt." Mrs. Thompson turned to Marcus. "We'll need to do background checks, but I think we can make you an offer by next week. The starting salary would be $65,000 annually with full benefits. Would that be acceptable?" Marcus felt dizzy. That was more money than he made in 3 years as a courier. "Yes," he managed to say. "That would be acceptable." Outside the building, still in his new suit, Marcus sat on a bench to catch his breath. His phone buzzed, a delivery notification from his Courier app. Instead of feeling trapped by it, he smiled. Today might be his last day as a courier, but he would never forget what this job taught him. He had 1 hour before his afternoon shift started, just enough time to change clothes and call his mother with the good news. As he walked to his bike, Marcus realized that sometimes life's biggest changes come disguised as ordinary moments, like a routine delivery on a rainy afternoon. Marcus's first day at Reynolds and Blake investment firm started with a security badge that actually let him through the front door instead of the service entrance. He was no longer the courier who delivered packages. He was now Marcus Chen, junior security analyst. His new desk was on the 35th floor, with a view of the city he used to cycle through. The computer was brand new, and his chair probably cost more than his bike. Everything felt surreal, like he had stepped into someone else's life. "Here's your welcome package," said Lisa, the HR assistant, dropping off some papers. "Though I guess you already know your way around the building better than most new employees." Her laugh made it hard to tell if she was being friendly or making fun of him. The IT department had 20 people, and Marcus was the only non-white employee. During the morning team meeting, he noticed how others reacted to him. Some, like his direct supervisor Mike Parker, were professionally polite but distant. Others whispered when they thought he wasn't looking. "So, you're Sarah Reynolds' special project," said James, a senior analyst, during lunch break. "Must be nice having friends in high places." Marcus felt his face grow hot. "I got this job because I'm qualified." Sure, James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We all know how it works. The company needs to fill their diversity quotas." Before Marcus could respond, another voice cut in. "Actually, James, Marcus got this job because he spotted 3 security vulnerabilities that you missed in last month's audit." It was Sarah, standing behind them with her lunch tray. "But please, continue explaining how our hiring process works." James turned red and quickly left the break room. Sarah sat down across from Marcus. "Don't let them get to you. They're just threatened because you're good at your job." "I've only been here 4 hours," Marcus said quietly. "How can they already judge me?" "People fear what's different," Sarah replied. "I used to be the same way, honestly. Growing up in my neighborhood, everyone looked like me. It wasn't until college that I realized how narrow my worldview was." Throughout the day, Marcus threw himself into his work. He started mapping out the building's security weaknesses, using his experience as a courier to identify blind spots. During an afternoon meeting, he presented his initial findings. "The loading dock has no proper authentication system," he explained. "Anyone in a courier uniform can walk in. I know because I've done it hundreds of times." Mike Parker frowned. "Are you suggesting we inconvenience our delivery services with extra security?" "I'm suggesting we protect our clients' data," Marcus replied firmly. "A breach doesn't always start with a computer hack. Sometimes it starts with a fake delivery person." After the meeting, Sarah caught up with him at the elevator. "That was impressive. But I noticed something. You didn't mention my incident with the robber when talking about alley security." Marcus shrugged. "I don't want people thinking I got this job because I helped you. I want them to see my work." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You know, I had my own assumptions about you when we first met. I thought all couriers were uneducated, just doing the job because they couldn't do anything else. I was wrong, and that taught me something important." As Marcus packed up his desk at the end of the day, he found a note that had been slipped under his keyboard. It read, "Nice job with the security presentation. Want to get coffee tomorrow and discuss your ideas more? Amy, Network Security." At home that evening, Marcus called his mother while cooking dinner. He told her about his day, translating the technical terms into Chinese. "Are they treating you well?" she asked, worried. "It's complicated," Marcus answered honestly, "but I can handle it. You always said that nothing worth having comes easily." Later, as he looked out his studio apartment window at the city lights, Marcus thought about how different everything felt. His courier uniform hung in the closet next to his new suits. 2 worlds, he thought, and somehow he had to find his place between them. His phone buzzed with a message from Sarah. "Great job today. Remember, you earned your place here. Don't let anyone tell you different." Marcus smiled slightly. Change was never easy, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. 3 months into his new job, Marcus was working late one Friday evening. Most of his colleagues had left for the weekend, but he wanted to finish reviewing the new security protocols he had designed. The coffee Emmy had brought him earlier was cold, but he barely noticed. His phone buzzed, another delivery notification from the Courier app. Even though he now had a good salary, Marcus still did deliveries on weekends. Part of it was to help other couriers learn safer routes, and part was to keep himself grounded. His mother thought he was crazy to keep the courier job, but some habits were hard to break. Suddenly, his computer screen flashed red. A warning popped up. Unauthorized access detected. Marcus sat up straight, instantly alert. More warnings started appearing across his monitor. System breach in progress, the security alert read. Marcus quickly typed commands, trying to trace the source. This was exactly the kind of attack he had been warning about in his reports. He grabbed his phone and called Mike Parker, his supervisor. No answer. He tried the emergency line. It went straight to voicemail. The regular security team had already gone home for the weekend. Marcus took a deep breath. He had trained for this. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he tracked the breach. The attack was coming through the building's delivery entrance, exactly where he had spotted weaknesses months ago. Thanks to his courier experience, Marcus knew every entrance to the building. He pulled up the security cameras on his screen. There, a maintenance worker was installing something on the basement-level network terminals. Except Marcus knew all the real maintenance workers from his delivery days, and this person wasn't one of them. He quickly activated the new security measures he had been developing. First, he isolated the infected systems. Then, he triggered a silent alarm to the real police instead of just building security. Finally, he used his access to lock down the basement area, trapping the fake maintenance worker. Within 20 minutes, the police had arrested the intruder. It turned out to be part of a sophisticated corporate espionage attempt. The maintenance worker had been trying to install devices that would steal client data. By Monday morning, everyone knew what had happened. Marcus walked into a very different office than the one he had left on Friday. Chen, Mike Parker called out as soon as Marcus stepped off the elevator. The CEO wants to see you. Now, the CEO's office was on the top floor. Marcus had only delivered packages here in his courier days. Now, he sat in a leather chair while Mr. Reynolds himself, Sarah's father, reviewed the security breach report. Impressive work, Mr. Chen, the CEO said, looking up from the papers. You stopped what could have been a catastrophic data breach. Our client's trust is everything in this business. I just did my job, sir, Marcus replied modestly. No, you did more than your job. You saw vulnerabilities others missed because you had a unique perspective. That's exactly what this company needs. Mr. Reynolds leaned forward. We're creating a new division, integrated security. Physical and cybersecurity working together. I want you to lead it. Marcus blinked in surprise. Lead it? But I've only been here 3 months. Sometimes experience isn't about time served, Mr. Reynolds said. It's about understanding what others don't see. You understand both worlds, the corporate environment and the practical realities of building security. That's rare. Later that day, Sarah found him still sitting at his desk, processing everything. I heard the news, she smiled. Head of Integrated Security. Not bad for a former courier. I'm still a courier, Marcus corrected her. Just on weekends now. Sarah laughed. You know what I admire about you? You haven't let success change who you are. That's rare in this building. As Marcus packed up that evening, he saw James, the senior analyst who had once questioned his qualifications, waiting by his desk. Hey, Chen, James said, looking uncomfortable. I was wrong about you. What you did this weekend. Well, none of us would have caught that breach. Good job. Marcus nodded, accepting the apology for what it was. Success, he was learning, sometimes changed other people's attitudes more than it changed you. That night, as he rode his bike home, yes, he still cycled to work, Marcus thought about how life had changed. In his pocket was the key to his new office, and in his heart was the satisfaction of knowing he had earned every bit of his success. 6 months into his role as head of integrated security, Marcus sat in his office reviewing applications for his team's internship program. The view from his window showed the same city streets he used to cycle through, but now he saw them differently. Every alley, every service entrance, every delivery route was part of the security puzzle he worked to solve. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Sarah, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the small shop around the corner, the same place where he used to warm up during his courier days. "Thought you could use this," she said, placing 1 cup on his desk. "You've been buried in those applications all morning." Marcus smiled gratefully. Their friendship had grown stronger over the months, built on mutual respect and shared experiences. They'd often had lunch together, talking about everything from work to family to their different backgrounds. "Thanks," he said, taking a sip. "I'm trying to choose candidates for the internship program. Most of them have better degrees than I do. But none of them have your experience," Sarah pointed out, sitting down. "That's why Dad approved this program, because you showed him that sometimes the best talent comes from unexpected places." The internship program had been Marcus's idea. After his promotion, he had convinced the company to create opportunities for students from community colleges and non-traditional backgrounds. It wasn't charity. It was about finding unique perspectives that could strengthen the company's security. "How's your mother doing?" Sarah asked, changing the subject. She knew Marcus's mother had recently finished her cancer treatment. "Much better," Marcus smiled. "The doctors say she's in remission. I was able to move her to a better apartment closer to her friends in Chinatown." He paused. "She wants to meet you, you know. She said she needs to thank the person who changed her son's life." Sarah shook her head. "You changed your own life, Marcus. I just happened to be there when you showed everyone who you really are." The conversation was interrupted by Amy from Network Security, who now reported to Marcus. She had become one of his strongest team members, and their coffee meetings had gradually turned into dinner dates. "Sorry to interrupt," Amy said, "but you should see this. Remember that security system you designed? 3 other companies have asked to buy the rights to it. They're offering 7 figures. Marcus sat back, stunned. The security system he had created, based on his experiences as a courier, was now considered innovative in the industry. It combined physical security insights with advanced cyber protection in a way no one had thought of before. Later that day, Marcus took a walk during lunch. His feet carried him to Portsmouth Square, where he used to eat his simple packed lunches. The elderly men were still playing Sayanki, but now they nodded to him with respect, the successful young man in a suit who still stopped to watch their games. His phone rang. It was Sarah. "Want to grab dinner tonight? Dad's taking the executive team to that fancy new restaurant to celebrate the security system sale." Marcus thought about how different his life was now. A year ago, he would have felt out of place in an expensive restaurant with executives. But now he understood something important. Success hadn't changed who he was, it had simply revealed who he had always been. "Actually," he replied, "why don't you all come to my place? Mrs. Rodriguez is teaching me how to make her famous tamales. Amy's coming too. It's time you experienced some real home cooking." Sarah laughed. "The great Sarah Reynolds, slumming it in your neighborhood?" "Hey, you're not the only one whose prejudices needed challenging," Marcus teased back. "Besides, Mrs. Rodriguez's tamales are better than any fancy restaurant." That evening, as Marcus watched Sarah and her father chat with Mrs. Rodriguez in his small apartment, while Amy helped set the table, he realized something profound. True growth wasn't about leaving your old life behind. It was about bridging different worlds and helping others cross those bridges too. His phone buzzed with a weekend delivery notification. Some habits were worth keeping, he thought, especially when they reminded you of where you came from and how far you'd come. 1 year after the day he saved Sarah from the robber, Marcus stood in front of a classroom at Bay Area Community College. His old professors had invited him to speak to the graduating computer science students. His story had become well known. The courier who became head of integrated security at one of the city's biggest investment firms. "Success isn't just about your degree or where you came from," Marcus told the students, many of whom reminded him of himself a year ago. "It's about seeing opportunities where others see obstacles. Every experience teaches you something valuable." In the audience, he saw Sarah and Amy sitting next to his mother, who had flown in from her new home in Chinatown. His mother looked healthy and happy, her cancer in full remission thanks to the treatment she could now afford. She beamed with pride as she watched her son inspire others. After the speech, a young student approached Marcus. She was working as a janitor to pay for her classes. Do you really still do courier deliveries on weekends? She asked. Every Saturday morning, Marcus smiled. It keeps me connected to where I started. Plus, I run the Courier Mentorship Program now. The program had been his latest initiative. Marcus had convinced his old courier company to partner with Reynolds and Blake, creating paid internships for delivery workers who wanted to learn about security and technology. Tom, his former supervisor, now helped run the program. Back at the office, Marcus's new team was a mix of people from different backgrounds. Some were traditional security experts, others were former service workers who understood the practical side of building security. Together, they had transformed how the company protected its assets. The board approved your proposal, Sarah announced, walking into his office. We're expanding the internship program to all departments. Dad says it's the most successful initiative we've had in years. Marcus looked around his office, so different from his tiny studio apartment, yet he had kept that too. Mrs. Rodriguez still brought him tamales, though now she was also the head of their building's new resident council, a position he had helped her achieve. How's the wedding planning going? Sarah asked, nodding toward the photo of Marcus and Amy on his desk. Their engagement had been announced last month, a love story that began with a simple coffee invitation. Amy wants a simple ceremony, Marcus replied. We're thinking of having it in Portsmouth Square, where I used to eat lunch during my courier days. The old men who play Xianqi there have already offered to be our witnesses. Sarah laughed. From watching Xianqi matches to getting married there, you really do keep your roots, don't you? Speaking of roots, Marcus said, pulling up a security report on his computer, remember that robber from last year? The police finally caught him last week. Your case helped them track down a whole ring of thieves targeting business districts. Sarah sat down, her face thoughtful. It's strange to think about that day now. I was so scared, but it ended up changing both our lives. It taught me something important, Marcus said. Sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes, if you're brave enough to take the chance. Just then, Marcus's phone buzzed, a special notification he had set up. Somewhere in the building, a courier had just made a delivery. Thanks to his new security system, every delivery was now tracked and verified, keeping both workers and the building safe. Time for your weekend delivery route? Sarah asked, noticing him check his phone. Not today, Marcus smiled. Today I'm interviewing new candidates for our internship program. There's this one application from a courier who's teaching herself coding between deliveries. Reminds me of someone I used to know. As Sarah left his office, Marcus looked out at the city skyline. His bike still stood in the corner, well-maintained and ready for weekend deliveries. On his desk, his old courier badge sat next to his executive ID, two pieces of the same story. His phone rang. It was Amy, calling about dinner plans. They were hosting a monthly gathering where executives and service staff could meet as equals, sharing stories and breaking down barriers. It had become a popular event, changing how people throughout the company viewed and treated each other. Marcus answered the phone, thinking about how life worked in circles. He had started as a courier who delivered packages, and now he delivered something more valuable: opportunity. Sometimes the best way forward was to remember where you came from and to hold the door open for others following the same path.